Welcome to the Arkansas farm case on our channel. Unravel the chilling mystery surrounding the Jody family. In a tragic turn of events, a little girl's death in a bathtub unveils secrets leading to an even darker fate for the family. Follow the eerie tale of Ken Jody, haunted by guilt, as he discovers a connection between the deaths of his granddaughter and son. Stay tuned for the shocking revelation that ties everything together in this gripping story of loss, guilt, and an unexpected twist. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Let the mystery unfold. The Arkansas farm is in western Ohio, United States of America. The owner of the farm is 62-year-old Ken Jody. Since his wife's death, his only pleasure has been tending the farm that was passed down from his grandfather. Ken Jody's greatest wish was to keep the farm in his family for generations. However, both sons were not interested in the farm and chose to go into business without exception. The eldest son, White, is still unmarried. In order to keep White to help him manage the farm, Jody did not hesitate to use the land on the farm to open a small factory for him. But White was focused on the factory and never asked about the farm. Jody was very disappointed. What worried him even more was his second son, Orman. Orman has been working in New York since he got married, but he doesn't agree to come back anyway. Seeing that I am getting older day by day, will this ancestral inheritance be ruined in my own hands? Jody couldn't sleep or eat well. In the summer of 2011, Jody received a call from his second son, Orman, saying that he was taking his wife and daughter, who had just turned 9, to visit relatives. Jody thought this as an opportunity to discuss the future of the farm while the whole family was together. A few days later, the Oleman family of 3 came to the farm. Before lunch, Jody couldn't wait to gather the whole family around and discuss the farm's problems with them. Orman was incomprehensible to his father's thoughts. He believes that he should find a suitable buyer to transfer the farm so that he can get a huge sum of money to invest in other projects. White's views are naturally similar to those of his younger brother. At this time, the little granddaughter, Windsor, ran in playfully, holding a net bag for catching butterflies. "Grandpa, Grandpa, do you see what I caught?" Windsor held a small net bag in his hand with 3 dark red moths in it. Jody gave her a perfunctory look. At this time, he had no intention of spending time with his granddaughter. He asked Windsor to get out, and then went on to talk to his son about the importance of keeping the farm again. After an afternoon of hard work, Jody failed to convince his 2 sons, and he was in an extremely bad mood. At night, Jody and his 2 sons drank a lot and passed out on the sofa in the living room. When he woke up, he felt sore all over and wanted to take a shower. When he got to the bathroom, he found that the water in the bathtub was full and there was a layer of foam floating on it. Apparently, someone had used it and hadn't drained the water. Jody felt a little unhappy and reached out to unscrew the water valve to drain the water from the bathtub. But as soon as he put his hand into the water, his expression immediately froze. There was clearly someone else in the bathtub. When the water gradually decreased, Jody's eyes widened. The face in the bathtub was so familiar to him, it was his most beloved granddaughter, Windsor. "Windsor! Windsor, what's wrong with you, my child?" He threw himself on the bathtub and reached out to take Windsor out. At this moment, Windsor's body had no warmth. He kept calling Windsor's name but received no response. He had a premonition that something serious must have happened. Sure enough, Windsor was no longer breathing. Hearing Jody's cry, the whole family came running over. Orman and his wife Yulin saw Jody rushing out of the bathroom with their daughter in his arms and didn't know what was going on. "Go to the police, call the ambulance," Jody shouted. Only then did the Olemans see their daughter's pale and lifeless face and hurriedly called an ambulance. But everything was irreversible. It was confirmed that Windsor was dead. Orman and Yulin could not accept that their daughter, who was alive and kicking just a few minutes ago, left them like this and died tragically in the bathtub without any explanation. This is simply a scene from a horror movie, so weird and incomprehensible. Why did Windsor die? What is this? Police first interviewed Jody, who first discovered the body. "I don't know how this tragedy happened. Anyway, after I woke up, I wanted to take a bath, and then I saw it in the bathtub." Jody hugged his head and cried. He didn't want to recall that terrible scene again, and he had no words. After saying that, he choked up. Orman told the police that his father and brother all drank too much that night and did not notice anything unusual in Windsor, and no one came to the house. Yulin also said that Windsor never left her side all day long, and before going to bed she clamored to take a shower. When she was at home, she always took a bath alone and nothing ever happened to her, so I didn't notice her coming back for a long time. Who knows? Yulene choked with tears. After a preliminary examination by the medical examiner, no external injuries were found on Windsor's body and there were no signs of a fight in the bathroom. The only explanation seemed to be that he died by drowning in the bathtub. But this statement is really unbelievable. How can someone drown in the shallow water of the bathtub? Besides, although she is not an adult, she still knows the basics of escape. At least she should scream in time. But Yulene was in another room only 3 meters away from the bathroom at the time, and she would definitely have heard the call. According to Yulene and Oriman's account, Windsor followed them into the farm and never left. No one has been here, so the possibility of outsiders committing the crime can almost be ruled out. Could it be that someone in his own family committed the crime? This may be even lower. First of all, there is no motive for murder. They are all close relatives. Who would have such a conflict with this little girl that he would kill her? Besides, there were only 4 people at home that night. Windsor's parents, Orman and Yulene, were sleeping in the room and White was in his factory. The surveillance in the factory could prove this to him. Jody discovered the body first and he was alone in the living room at the time. If one of his own committed the crime, he seemed to be the most suspect. The police also suspected him, but why would he kill his granddaughter when he was already 70 years old? It would do him no good at all. Every possibility has been ruled out and new evidence will only come from Windsor's autopsy report a week later. The mysterious death in Windsor left the Geordie family immersed in great grief and panic. The most painful part was Jody, who was not only sad but also guilty. He felt that if he had not had to drink so much with his son, Windsor would not have been left unattended and nothing would have happened. Also, if he hadn't repeatedly asked his son to return to his hometown to visit relatives, maybe nothing would have happened. In short, he felt that everything was his fault and that he had personally killed his granddaughter Windsor. Yulene and Orman were so frustrated that they even gave up on important work. Yulene looked at Windsor's photos in a daze all day long, while Orman drank to drown his sorrows and got drunk almost every day. Seeing this, Jody became even more sad. Every time he closed his eyes, Windsor's lovely face appeared in front of him. In this way, he also began to drink to drown his sorrows. Perhaps only when he was drunk could he forget everything and get temporary relief. On the evening of June 24, 2011, Jody was alone in the living room drinking. Late at night, when he was in a daze, he suddenly heard a sound outside the door. The sound was very strange and rustling, as if someone was stepping on snow in the snow or stepping on leaves. Jody thought it was the wind and didn't pay attention, but then he heard someone crying quietly outside. He immediately became alert, and when he heard it carefully, it didn't sound like crying, but seemed like moaning. So he stood up and walked slowly over and suddenly heard a sound on the window glass behind him. When he turned his head and looked, he was so frightened that all the hairs on his body stood up. He saw a terrifying face pasted on the window. The left half of the face was gray and white, as bumpy as tree bark. The right half of the face was the same as that of a normal person, with only one eye extremely distorted, and the mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to say something, but Jody only heard a very faint moan. "Ghost! Come on! There's a ghost!" Jody shouted with a trembling voice, and then he saw something suddenly separated from the weird face. The thing was like a gray piece of paper, flying into the air and floating to the chandelier outside the window. Jody took a closer look and saw it was a large gray moth, and that half of the face returned to normal. It turned out that the moth had just fluttered on that face, so this effect occurred. So, isn't this a grimace? "Are you a human? Who are you?" Jody said as he approached the window. Suddenly his face turned pale. He opened the door and rushed out desperately because he recognized that face. Yes, this person was his second son, Orman. "Orman, what's wrong with you? Wake up, my Orman, wake up. Someone is coming, someone is coming." He rushed to the windowsill in 2 steps. Orman was leaning on the windowsill, twitching all over and looking pale. He was obviously trying to ask his family for help, but for some reason he couldn't make a loud enough sound and could only moan lowly. When he saw his father, Orman was unable to react and just looked at him with a look of despair. Jody rushed over and hugged him worriedly and found that his body was shaking violently and he made a ho-ho sound in his throat. Yulene ran out of the house quickly when she heard the cry. Why did my husband, who was fine just over an hour ago, suddenly become like this? She was stunned, and it took her a long time to call the police, trembling under Jody's shouts. But before the police car arrived, Orman suddenly had a violent convulsion, curled up into a ball, straightened up, and then became motionless. When the ambulance took Orman to the hospital, he had no vital signs, and the police investigation began. Like his daughter Windsor, Alaman did not have any injuries on his body, just a slight scratch on his face. The police had no clue. They could only interview Orman's family while patiently waiting for the results of the autopsy. Yulin told the police that an hour before the accident, Orman was still in the room trying to persuade her not to dwell on the pain of losing her daughter. It is better to return to New York as soon as possible and resume normal life. Then she said that she would go to White to discuss going back, but Yulin soon heard Jody's call and ran downstairs to see Orman's terrifying appearance. From her account, the police learned that the time between Orman leaving the room at approximately 11:20 and the discovery of his accident would not exceed 20 minutes at most. What happened in these 20 minutes is the key to the case. White said Orman did go to his place but left quickly, and nothing was out of the ordinary. There is no doubt that what happened to Orman happened during his absence. These two strange cases only had scattered clues which puzzled the police. The mysterious death of two relatives in a row was a huge blow to the Jody family. Yulin almost went crazy, and White no longer took care of the nearby factory but stayed with his father all the time. A series of blows had left Jody in a daze all day, and White was afraid that something would happen to him again. "Tell me, why did Windsor and Orman die? Who killed them?" Jody said this sentence repeatedly. He couldn't figure it out. No outsiders sneaked into the farm to commit crimes, and one of his own could not be the murderer. How did Windsor and Orman die? This is almost impossible, but it happened so horribly. On the night of June 26, 2011, White watched his father fall into a deep sleep before leaving his room with confidence. After Orman's accident, he slept next to Jody every day. Because Jody's mental state is really worrying, he always screams inexplicably and wakes up from nightmares. White asked Yulin to look after Jody and call him immediately if anything happened. He wanted to go to the factory to have a look. Less than 20 minutes after White left, Jody suddenly sat up from the bed, yelled, "I thought of it! I thought of it!" Then he jumped off the bed and ran out of the room quickly. Yulin also left the door after hearing the cry. Jody rushed to her, grabbed Yulin's shoulders, shook her hard, and said, "I thought of it. Come with me." Yulin didn't know that he was deranged and talking nonsense, but she really found something. After all, she was not there when Orman's accident happened. She first comforted Jody to sit down and then called White on her cell phone, but no one answered. Yulin suddenly had an ominous premonition in her heart. Could something have happened to White as well? Jody heard that White had gone to the factory and immediately rushed out. Yulin followed closely and ran towards White's factory. The distance from Jody's residence to White's factory was nearly 300 meters. Jody ran over almost like crazy. As soon as he reached the shed in front of the factory, his eyes were caught by several large moths under the chandelier. Attracted. Those moths were flying back and forth around the dazzling chandelier, and there were many small moths beside them. Jody's lips began to tremble slightly, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. He pointed at the moths and said, "I saw them before Olaman died." He rushed into the factory, but he searched all over the factory and found no trace of White. At this time, Yulin found a mobile phone in front of the small door of the factory which belonged to White. This indicates that he may have gone to the office area behind the factory. Jody and Yulin hurried there, and within 10 meters they saw a terrifying scene. A hand stretched out from an abandoned landscape pool. The hand was covered with black liquid and its fingers were spread out, point straight to the sky. There is still a faint light coming out of the pool, which is the light emitted by the landscape lights inside. Jody cautiously approached the hand, and suddenly several gray moths flew out of the pool. The moment they took off, Jody smelled a strange smell, the smell of chemicals. Yulin looked into the pool with wide eyes and saw a man lying in it with his left hand stretched out as if asking for help. He is none other than White. Yulin screamed twice in fear and did not hear his answer. Soon the police car arrived here. When the police lifted White out of the landscape pool, they found a lot of black and gray paste in the pool. At Jody's reminder, the police captured several moths, which also had that strange smell. Although White was sent to the hospital for rescue, he still did not survive. Next, police found cyanide on the moth. Everyone knows that this is a highly poisonous substance that can kill people if it touches even a little bit. This highly toxic substance is usually produced in gold mines, electroplating plants, chemical plants, and other places. The factory that Jody funded for his son is to do metal coating on the surface of industrial finished products, that is, electroplating. Obviously, he was killed by himself. A few days later, the autopsy reports came out on both Windsor and Alleman, who had also been poisoned with cyanide. So why are they poisoned? Through investigation, the police found that it was due to illegal operation of the factory and failure to destroy raw material barrels, which caused cyanide and other harmful substances to be discharged into the landscape pool. The habit of moths is to welcome light, and the landscape lights in the pool happened to attract them, so the moths were contaminated with cyanide. There is a protective layer of greasy powder on their bodies which just acts as an isolation layer, so it does no harm to them. Jody recalled that Windsor had indeed caught moths before the accident, and that Orman had been to the factory before the accident and might have been exposed to poisonous moths. In this regard, Jody saw the moths on his face as he was dying. The moth can attest. The factory was demolished, and Jody could never have imagined that the factory he had funded so that his son could inherit the farm would actually kill his 2 sons and a granddaughter. He sadly buried all 3 of them on the farm, where they would forever guard the family's property. From then on, people often saw an old man with a face full of vicissitudes of life sitting quietly in front of 3 tombstones in the dusk, holding a Bible in his hand and mumbling something. He is Ken Jordy. Thank you for joining Story Community for the chilling tale of the Arkansas farm case. The mysterious deaths of Windsor, Orman, and White unfolded a tragic story of family loss and unexpected twists. If you found this story intriguing, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more gripping narratives on Story Community. Until next time, remember, truth can be stranger than fiction.